Cool. So welcome to our CCT seminar, our skills seminar. So today we have Chandler Sutherland, who is a fifth year plant biology and DE student that's studying mutation and plant immune system evolution in the Castellivo lab in PMB. She's learned a lot of science communication through CLEAR, which is communicating life science, ecological, and agricultural research, which is a PMB student group focused on outreach. And she does a booth at the Berkeley's Farmers Market on plant biology topics for the public. She also has been a science communication fellow with an organization called Wonderfest, where she got a lot of great training and resources and speaking opportunities that she's happy to talk to about. And then she also, she based a skill seminar on what she's learned through a lot of these programs, especially science through story. So she's a great person to talk about science communication.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I did email the people who had RSVP, but in case you didn't, try to think of a talk that you have coming up that you want to practice doing this type of story building and like narrative structure for. And so it can be a conference talk, it can be like a hypothetical talk at CCV retreat if you have nothing coming up, or like even a lab meeting. You can kind of think about how you want to display this type of things, but you can use this type of framework for any of your upcoming science talks. And yeah, just kind of what Sarah had mentioned is I've done a lot of like outreach type stuff, and I think it really helps in making you a better communicator to other scientists. So any opportunity that you have to do public outreach, it really forces you to like hone in your skills that when you go and end up talking to other scientists, you feel more comfortable and better at doing that kind of science thinking. So I'm curious, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being very uncomfortable and 5 being super comfortable, how do you guys feel about giving talks and your current communication skills? Think about it. 3, 2, 1, flash a number. I'm seeing 2s, 3s, 4s, 3s. Okay, no one's a 1. Love to see that. I probably would give myself a 3 right now, but I'm excited that we're all kind of starting from a similar place. Okay, so storytelling is an ancient and effective communication strategy. It's like the framework of human civilization and communication. And so it makes sense to apply it to the way we talk about science, because effectively communicated science is like, no matter how exciting and cool your research is, if you can't communicate it effectively to other scientists and eventually to the public, it's meaningless. Like, you won't get the grants, jobs, opportunities that you want if you can't tell your story well. And what's nice about applying storytelling to science talks is that narrative arcs are a recognizable framework. People are used to stories, they've been hearing them their whole lives. And so if you introduce this narrative arc, it allows people to focus on the science because they're not trying to figure out like what your framework is. There's something that they can grab onto. And there's these recognizable like emotional and organizational patterns. More. They also keep your audiences engaged and energized throughout the talk. And so if you're building action and you're introducing twists and turns, it keeps your audience hooked the entire time. Like, there's so many seminars I've been to where like they have me for the intro slide, they have me for result 1, and then I'm like completely lost. And I spend 40 minutes being like, what does this mean? Where are we? What's going on? And so having these narrative arcs can help you keep everybody with you the whole time, and also like pick people back up as they get lost. And it also makes your science memorable. If you are able to infuse like emotion and story into your science talks, it helps people remember it and think back to like, oh, that was a really great talk, or like, oh, I remember like the main message that they were trying to send because their science was well described and interesting and engaging throughout the talk. Science is the business of storytelling, and so you have to kind of infuse this into your talks and it will pay you dividends. I want to note here that sometimes with the idea of like storytelling, people might worry like, oh, I'm not going to come across as professional, or it's going to be a little too dramatic. And I think that a lot of it is person to person, and it's like whatever's authentic for you will work for the crowd. But this is mostly a framework, and it can come across very professional and subtle if done right. And so it doesn't have to be like you're up there like singing, and like it doesn't have to be too dramatic, but like having the organization and some of the tips of storytelling does help kind of tie it all together and keep people engaged. Okay, so where do we begin? You've got the talk. Yay. Now what? I think the worst thing to do is just start like Frankensteining your lab meeting slides together and like try or like taking your figures from your publication and like copying them onto slides. Like that is not where you want to start. But where do you start then? And so before I give any talk, I will explicitly define the parameters of the talk and then my goal of the talk. And so not to be too meta, but I did it for this seminar today. And so my title that I gave Sarah was Storytelling in Scientific Talks, Drafting and Refining a Narrative for Better Communication. Is this the best title ever? No. But your title should be short, explicit, and not bury the lead. You should tell people exactly what they're going to get. But the difference between a talk title and a paper title is that you don't have to give them all the context. Like it doesn't have to be all of the details, your system, your exact gene, any of that. It can be just like your final message. And that you should be, your goal with this is to be explicit and attract viewers. And so it should be short, snappy, and true. Okay, time. If you don't know, you should ask the conference organizer or whoever's hosting the talk, like how much time do I have and how much time is there for questions? And so with this talk, 45 minutes, 5 minutes for questions. But as you're building your slides, and if you have like, you know, a standard conference talk, maybe 12 minutes with 3 minutes for questions. If you have 24 slides, you know, you've way overblown it. Like everyone's different and how long they take per slide and how much data they put per slide, and that's going to be up to you. But as a rule of thumb, you should not try to go faster than 1 minute per slide. So if you have a 12-minute talk and you have 24 slides, you're trying to put way too much into that amount of time. And so you need to cut pretty dramatically. And you want to have that time for questions. Like that is the most valuable part of the talk for you, is getting that feedback from the audience. And then explicitly define your audience. So who's going to be sitting there and what do they want from you? So today it's CCV students, I don't think there's any post-its, who want to improve their communication skills. And then what is their background? So you guys in talks before, you maybe have an important talk coming up that you're preparing for. You've seen a lot of good and bad talks. Like in many ways, you guys are experts on science communication because you've sat through seminars and you know what works and what doesn't. And you have technical science across a lot of different CCV disciplines. There's a lot of different science in this room, but the way that we communicate it, a lot of very similar skills. And then your final parameter, or almost final parameter, the one that's the most important is your goal. And you get one goal per talk. Not goals, you get one. Even a 50-minute talk, I wouldn't want to do more than one goal. And so you have to sit with yourself and with your title and be like, okay, what do I want my audience to come away with after this talk? And like write it down, because that is going to be what guides your preparation, and the entire structure of your talk is in pursuit of this goal. Often with science talks, it's like promote our model, our hypothesis. Sometimes it's introduce this tool, get people to use it. Your goal can be get a job, get collaborators, like promote a data set, but you get one goal. And then finally, method. Usually it's going to be slides, but if you are in a more casual setting, I encourage you to think like, oh, could I have it be more of like a roundtable or a workshop? But let's say like you're preparing for like a retreat talk or a conference talk, like it's going to be slides with questions. Okay, so I have a little worksheet and I have a couple copies, but it's also on the CCV Skills website if you're like a digital person only. But I encourage you to explicitly write out these parameters for some upcoming talks. And think about, yeah, we're going to take like 3 minutes to write these things down, and then we'll kind of maybe share with our neighbors and then come back together and talk through one of them.
If you need the website, you can just Google it, CCV Skills.
I bet you have handouts. That was very my GSI style. As I was like, and here's a worksheet. There's markers. I was like, should. It's not like,
Yeah.
it's not, it's, yeah, you can have it on your own document too if you didn't get it printed out. Like, you don't get to use Are people satisfied with that first block? Thumbs up, more time. Okay. I think it could be fun to go around and just quickly say like the context of the talk, like what you're thinking about, and then what your goal is. Does that sound good? Could you start, please?
Sure. The context of my talk that I'm thinking of is just a lab meeting that's coming up. And my goal is a little bit, yeah, I always try to not have multiple goals, but the main goal would be to show the shortcomings of the method that's out there and propose an alternative.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Ideally, I would like to also educate people that are not familiar with like viral genomes, like about like virus stuff, just because the lab is really diverse. But that'd be on this talk, or like if I split it with another person, like it's even shorter, right?
Mhm. Yeah, lab meetings are tricky because you are kind of like doing a survey of everything. And so it's not like you can just show like what worked and what's a cohesive story. Like you are kind of getting feedback on everything. But I think it is good to like set a goal on like what you want feedback on, and then
Mm,
or like yeah, what you want to teach the lab, and then kind of
mhm.
arrange it. Cool.
I'm thinking about conference talk right now that I would like to give on like research, and I think our goal would be to convince people that I see this signal and that it's found where I found it. So I guess just kind of like convince them like, this is what I see and this is interesting.
Okay, like promote your
I guess yeah, promote the
hypothesis.
research.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Thanks.
My talk is another talk or smart lab. And I'd like my goals to be to encourage the rest of the lab to understand and support everyone.
Cool.
I'm giving the next CCD skills seminar.
Oh,
so
nice.
my job is to
So-
convince people to manage their files in a simpler and local way.
Cool.
My talk is I'm going to a conference, like small conference next week. And like 10 to 12 minutes. And my main goal is I want to convince a bunch of ecologists that using this model interaction system from our lab is the best way to test molecular hypotheses.
Cool.
I don't have like any big talks in the open so calls, it feels like, but I do have to give like a small talk class. At the end of the semester, that's basically just 10 to 15 minutes to talk about. Easily, like that would explain, so like the goal is to like condense it, but still just make it understandable to the general audience. Which I think is gonna be really complicated since it's like a lot of computational things like that.
I have a conference talk at the end of June. They told me the talks we submitted. And I think my audience is going to be a little bit less competition minded, so that's the big goal. Is to then get them to be excited and want to use my net. There.
Cool.
And the seminar putting up with like other PhD postdocs faculty of like our lab group is kind of like our general collection of labs. So I guess the main goal is also estimates. And it's like my hypothesis, like it's also touchline research.
Cool.
I have a really quick talk at the end of my rotation with the rest of the first years. And I think my goal is to just sort of talk about what I've been doing and getting window into the lab.
Nice.
I have a thesis committee meeting coming up, so it's like an hour and a little more than an hour. And goal is to convince all the professors that I'm on track. So, see how that goes.
For sure. So it's a lot of like convincing, right? You like need to get everybody like on your side. And then also, I think it is interesting to think about how the audience changes the goal. And so like when I give talks to CCB, I like change my framing and background to like introduce everyone to the idea of like immune systems across the tree of life. The plant immune system is interesting in these ways. And I don't talk at all about like mechanisms of plant immunity, right? Because that's like not interesting for CCB. They don't care. When I'm talking to like the plant immune crowd, I like have to bring them on board very slowly to computational skills at all and like what tools I'm using and be very explicit in like what I'm doing and why, because they're not comfortable with computational things. And so it's like that really changes both like my framing, my introduction, and then my goal. Like I'm convincing the plant people to like get on board with comp stuff, and I'm convincing CCB to like be excited about it. And so it does really change your goal and also like how you frame the talk. Okay, so now that we have our goals, the next step is to define the indispensable data and the context it requires. And so this is like when you look at your goal and you look at your time, it's like how much can I show and what is like absolutely required to get everybody on board to do this convincing. And so kind of if you're like have a manuscript around like around the same time that you're giving a talk, it becomes enticing to like just copy the figures over in the same order. But I really want to challenge you guys to think about what figures are like indispensable, and then what is like, oh, I was writing this paper and I had to show it the same thing 3 different ways. Like pick one of those ways. It's the most clear and just do that. And if people care, want to know about those other ways, you can talk about it in questions or afterwards, but like just the bare bones of what's explicitly required. And so once you have that, like here's a plot that I show a lot. And it's a bimodal distribution of Arabidopsis and NLRs, which are immune receptors. And so when I look at this plot, and you have to try to look at your data with fresh eyes, which is tough, but like imagine this is your first time seeing this plot ever. You're like, okay, what do I need to know to understand this plot? What an NLR is? Why do we care about NLRs? What entropy is? Why we chose to use entropy? And then kind of that's the introduction questions. And then the interpretation questions are like, why is it bimodal? Why did we choose to bin? And like, what does this mean in the context of plant use? And like, where do we go from here? So take a few more minutes, maybe like 2 minutes, and just roughly like, what are some key pieces of data that you are going to show in your talk? And if you're doing more of like a skills seminar, like what are your like examples of bad data management or something like that? And like, how do you get people to then take that and use that to kind of distill your introduction? I would say 2 more minutes, and feel free to like chat with your neighbor about what you're thinking. All right. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving, but as you're like preparing for these talks, explicitly writing out the data that's essential for your goal and what introduction is required for it and what interpretations are is really helpful, because now it's like you have your building blocks. And now the question is, how do we bring them together? And that's where we can introduce the narrative arc. Come on, let me advance. Okay. So this is like your classic elementary school English class narrative arc. You have your exposition, some inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. But the scientific method actually maps quite nicely onto this, right? Introduction, hypothesis or question, like methods, results, discussion, conclusion. So it's a nice kind of guiding framework. But when you're building a talk, I recommend centering your resolution on your goal and working backwards. If you're not going to be able to have time to explain like your entire project, your entire thesis, your entire paper. Like you kind of have to pick one through line, one goal. And so you start with that goal, you can work your way backwards and think like, okay, what was the question that led to the result I'm trying to convince people of? Or like, what was the motivation to develop this tool that I want people to use? And then what's kind of fun is you can also play with your protagonist. So I've used a couple different protagonists when I talk about my work. Sometimes my protagonist is a plant, singular. Sometimes it's like the plant immune system. Sometimes it's me and my team. Sometimes it's like immune systems in general. But it can be kind of a nice exercise to think through your work from the point of view of a few different protagonists. Like I enjoy a talk where it's like the mighty organism, and they talk about the trials and tribulations. But think about it in a few different ways and see what makes the most sense for you in your project. And then this is kind of the fun part, is like once you have your protagonist, you can think about, okay, what is the inciting incident? What were obstacles? What were stakes? What were twists? And what's really nice is that this like can be very authentic. Like science is not linear. There's a lot of conflict and like surprising results and things that you weren't expecting and obstacles. And so you can use like the real story of what happened to kind of guide your talk. And those are often very engaging talks when you talk about like, we found this and then this went wrong and it caused us to do that. And like showing a result and being like, this was actually really unexpected because of X. And so then we went to go do this. And that can be really engaging and keep the audience with you as you move through the talk. And then eventually finishing with your resolution, making sure you are still landing on that goal and your final unifying theme. You're convincing people of your tool, your method, whatever it is you're looking for. They're offering you the job. They're letting you graduate. Like you are finishing on that theme, explicitly or not. So here's an example of the narrative I use a lot in my talks. I start with introducing immune systems across the tree of life, and this theme, immune systems require high diversity. We know this has been known for a long time. My inciting incident is the observation that some plant immune genes have really high diversity and others don't. And that kind of sparks this question of like, how do they generate diversity? I start with a study in Arabidopsis, and then I describe these limitations due to the system. And then I kind of bring it back with applying our techniques to maize and at a pangenome level. And that leads to, these unifying results, these conflicting results, and kind of brings us back down to the implications of like plants have very high diversity in their immune systems. It's more than you would expect from random chance. We're calling it anticipatory immunity. Please use that term. So that's like my current narrative arc structure. But there's a couple different ones that I think fit nicely. Hero's journey is kind of fun. You start with like your call to adventure. You move into the unfamiliar world. There's trials, there's tribulations. You're transformed in some way, and you come back to the familiar world. So like you have this tool and a collaborator asks you to use it for a new organism or a new question. You're like, absolutely. Unexpected difficulties, doesn't apply well, not generalizable, confusing results, negative data. It's okay. We optimize, generalize the tool. There's new interpretations of results and a silver bullet idea that brings us to a better tool and a better understanding of the system. And now you should use it on your stuff because we've done such a good job. Some other narrative structures, result problem is common in scientific talks and can be quite effective, where you like show a result, you give the interpretation of it, and you're like, but that wasn't enough. Or, but that led to this other question. And then you kind of build and build and build until you reach some resolution. But you like use each one of your data points to kind of bring you into the next data based on some shortcoming of it. Mystery, kind of fun. If there's like questions, hypotheses are often really confusing. And so it's like you start with this question and it's like there's lots of false starts and false leads, but you end up solving the case and finding out the resolution in your talk. Call to action, that works a lot or very well for these kind of convince type things. Like maybe you want your field to be better about open science or depositing their data, and you can like tell a story about how like you were able to figure something out because of all of this accessible data and everyone should deposit it. Or like everyone should use my tool because it's better than all the other tools, and here's the ways in which it's improved, and here's the shortcomings of the other tools. And then another common one people talk about with science communication is and, but, therefore. And I think that this is mostly helpful in like writing an abstract, but it can be a nice way to frame the like a shorter talk is like you give like statement A is true and statement 2 is true, but there's a conflict. And then therefore we changed whatever and resolved it. And so it's like you can give two things that are true and known in the field, like introduction. Your conflict is like your question or hypothesis, like something that doesn't quite add up, and then therefore is your proposed resolution. So plants require diverse immune systems, and mutation is mostly deleterious. But we see high mutations at these immune genes. Therefore, we think that there's, somatic diversity generation. So we're going to take 5 minutes and develop our own narrative arcs. And I think I'm going to force you guys to pair up. So turn to a neighbor, introduce yourself if you don't know them. And groups actually work pretty nice. Okay. And talk through like some protagonists you're thinking about. Talk through some arcs. Talk through your organization. And we'll come back in 5 minutes.
Such a good choice.
Yeah, sure.
All right. I love the discussion. It's so good. Let's bring it back.
Yeah.
Re-entering. All right. Does anyone want to share out of the pairs, like a protagonist, a potential protagonist?
I will say like I was trying to figure out if the protagonist would be me as a scientist or like the protagonist would be like the scientific world at large. And I think the scientific world at large is like much more interesting because like me as a scientist, it's kind of half the story of like me just figuring out stuff and like not knowing like the background of something and then like, finding it out like a month later or something. But like the scientific world at large, it's like much more compelling. Because like everybody knows like my study organism, which is like SARS-CoV-2. So that like that interests people, I think.
No, that's really cool. And it's like the entire field is working towards a common goal.
Yeah. I think that fits better. It's like maybe down the line when I know what I'm doing a little bit more, like maybe I can be the protagonist.
For sure.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think like this is a very useful framework, but something I heard Sarah say was like you don't want to anthropomorphize your organism, which is true. And so, but like having like the plant or your organism like be the main character doesn't mean that you have to like ascribe it like feeling or meaning, but it's like you can tell it from the perspective. But you're right, it's like that is something to be careful of as you're kind of like adding some of this drama. It's like you want to make sure that everything is still correctly interpreted and it's just like point of view. And you never are going to be like, we're telling the story of the plant. It's like, I'd like to introduce this organism and like guide kind of through the broader questions. But yeah, definitely something to be aware of. Cool. So I like this quote a lot. A good story cannot be devised, it has to be distilled. Like you're living the story of your science and it's very messy and complicated and confusing. And so like your job in the communication is to distill it. And you can do that by like careful planning and like working on these frameworks. But really what's going to help you distill the story is practicing. And it sucks to hear that, but it's true. And you're going to be like iterating through your slides quite a bit in your preparation. Like, let's say in the context, like this isn't really applicable for like a lab meeting, which are like pretty low stakes. But if you're giving a conference talk as like a fifth year and you're like, I'm on the hunt for postdocs, like big deal, high stakes talk, like you should be doing practice talks to broad audiences, your lab, your cohort, non-scientific, even if it is scientific talk, to get feedback on like body language, posture, that sort of thing. Like my most high stakes talk I gave recently, I like ran it all the way through twice a day for like 5 days leading up to it.
Wow.
And when you get to that point, it's really nice because you're like, you don't have to put as much text on the slides because you know what you're going to say with each slide. And then when you actually get up there, like you're not as nervous because it's like you have the script kind of down. You don't have to look at your notes. You don't have to read off the slide and you like know your transitions. That's a lot of work for like a lab meeting or a lower stakes talk. But like if you are giving that really high stakes talk, it's super helpful. And as you're kind of practicing, you're going to be noticing like what text is not necessary, what figures are not necessary, and like what is really driving you towards your goal. So you're going to be refining your themes and like rigorously determining if like your goal is supported by what you're showing. And this is actually really helpful in like figuring out what experiments you need to do because you're like, oh, my goal is not supported by what I'm showing. But like after this talk, I'm going to have to go do X, Y, Z to like finish the story. And then just a note on kind of like style, like you are the guide. And so you have to like really thoughtfully lead your audience through your story and your science. It is like your responsibility to thoughtfully arrange your presentation to keep the logical flow consistent and to make sure you keep it with you as much as possible. And on that note, subtlety is not effective and repetition is. And so you need to like spoon feed your audience and guide them through figures and through your talk at large without being condescending. But like you need to use the tools at hand in like a slide format to do so. So like an example is like here is a slide that I've shown before. And I really like animation and I like really aesthetically boring slides. but you'll figure out your own style. Like some people like the dark slides with the white text and don't like animation, but I think rule of thumb, no more than 2 figure panels per slide. Any more than that, and you're really overwhelming the audience with data. But like with this figure, I start with like the genome-wide distribution, and then I like layer on my genes of interest. But I can start here and say like, this is the x-axis and describe it. This is the y-axis. And I'm showing you like the genome-wide distribution, both in like these, you know, histograms and in this like density plot in the middle. And then I overlay my genes. And then I can talk about them in relationship to the rest of the genome. And then as I describe the shortcomings of this figure, I can introduce a second test that we did that shows something similar, but a different test, different way. So like I'm using the animations, I'm using color, I'm using timing to kind of build up to this. Whereas if I had started here, like what's going on? Like I'm describing figure A, they're reading figure B. It's like I've lost the audience and the attention. And yeah, just don't copy the entire figure panel, put it on your slide and talk through it. Like it's not gonna work. Okay. And then also I'm a big fan of homing slides. And so it's a slide that will help reorient the audience and kind of pick up people you've lost. So usually you introduce it in the beginning. I use this as kind of my like end of my introduction before I do results. I'm like, this is what we have to start with. And so I'll like show this, and it's like the title is like a fact. And then we have kind of our AM statements here where it's like genomic processes generate variation, selection promotes its maintenance. I describe the question. I'll show a couple results slides, and I'll come back to it and like add by animation these different results that I've shown them through different figure panels. And then let's say I like switch systems, I add my maze, I learn different things, and then I end on this slide. And so that's a big thing, is like, you don't want to end on your acknowledgements. You want to do your acknowledgements and switch to a slide that's a summary slide, and then say, I'm happy to take any questions. Because that brings your audience back to what you've talked about and reminds them of the questions they've thought of. And so then that way you get better questions, which is like one of this is the feedback that you get. Okay, so project credibility. This is tricky, but as like early career scientists, we don't often have the benefit of like, what is it called? Cognitive trust in a conference. So cognitive trust is like people like read your credentials, they know that you're a scientist. And like when you're giving a public talk, you often have cognitive trust because they like know that you're a PhD student, and that confers like some level of meaning. If you're in a conference and you say like, oh, I'm a PhD student, you might get like negative cognitive trust. And so you have to really rely on effective trust, which is in your control. And that's like how people perceive you as like competent and trustworthy. And a lot of that comes from like posture and pacing and eye contact and hand movements, if it's like useful for you and natural for you. But it's, you know, if there's a podium, you want to like get out from behind the podium, you want to like look around the room and make long eye contact with people in the room. You want to go slow and like pause after big statements. So it's like you're at the end of your talk, you say your like final conclusion sentence, and you say it and you like count to 3 and like really let it like sit. And all of that is really difficult, but it comes with time and with practice. If you practice a lot, you're pacing, and you'll seem more credible and more trustworthy and more engaging when you do all of that. And this is where like the really painful stuff comes in, where like record yourself, see what it looks like, see how fast you were. And it's like all of that is so uncomfortable, but it like really does make a difference on how well your talks go and how much people listen to you. What else? And then yeah, lead with confidence. This is your story, and you get to like guide people through it and help them understand your science you've worked so hard on. So like own it and like have command of the room because you've earned it. And then I know we're almost out of time, but every talk is a job talk and every talk is a practice talk. Every talk is a job talk is something my PI says a lot, where she's like, every talk is you might get a job from every talk. It's like people are evaluating you every talk, which is stressful, but every talk is also a practice talk. And so like your next talk afterwards, think about like what went wrong, what went right. Like think about the questions you get. Like what did people understand? What did people not understand? How can I improve? Because every talk is also building off of your previous talks. like get one of your lab mates and solicit like handed feedback and like ask questions specifically. Like, what did you think of my pacing? Was this part clear? Like, what did you think of this? If there was a recording, ideally watch it, and then you can see your like body language type stuff and see how that went. And then just like take advantage of low stakes opportunities to build your skills. Like do the CCB student seminar, do like lunch seminars, think about your lab meetings as opportunities for science communication practice. And then like your next seminar that you go to, if it like sucks, what are they doing wrong? What are they like good seminars? What are they doing right? So like pay attention to what works and what doesn't, and you'll never be bored in a seminar again. I can promise you that. Yeah, so as Sarah said, I learned a lot of this from Wonderfest, which is a year-long science communication fellowship. If you're interested, let me know. I'll connect you with them. And then the CLEAR project, public outreach is a great way to practice these skills, and it's paid dividends on my ability to communicate my science to other scientists. And also it's just a great part of the job, communicating to the public. And then, yeah, I based a lot of this on Science Through Story by Sarah L. Shappy. She was a Berkeley PhD, and now she does like science communication consulting. And I think she does some stuff on campus still. So keep an eye out for that. It's a nice addition to this workshop. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
What was your choice of the art that you used for?
Oh my gosh, that is like part of my personal presentation style is I start a lot of my talks with like a painting that's called Mutations. Cause like I don't have like, I don't know, it's just been like a fun thing that I did. Like most of my talks start with that painting because I don't really have like a microscopy image that's like super beautiful or anything. So it's like just kind of a nice way to like bring everybody together. And it's like very pretty. So that's been part of, and so when I was making this talk, I was like, the bard, storyteller paintings, like that sort of thing. So I don't know. But yeah, find your presentation style. Well, good luck with all of your upcoming talks and thanks for coming. Yay. It's